So Gary, how did you get into astrology?
Oh man, my journey to astrology is really kind of incredible. It's almost too incredible to believe at times. Like looking back on it now, for a long time it was so fresh for me that I never really thought about it. But looking at it now, sometimes it's almost too much even for me to believe myself, because I kind of started out being disillusioned with traditional schooling. You know, we were talking about the whole jump from third house to ninth house and how you skip the Virgo and everything, and I just wanted to get the hell out of the university schooling system and everything, and I just took off and started hitchhiking around the country and just really living. You know, I was 21 years old. I wanted to live, and somebody gave me a pack of tarot cards at a rainbow gathering. And they were like, "You're supposed to have these," and I'm like, "Okay," you know. He's like, and I was like, "Well, how do you know that?" And he's like, "Well, you look wise." And I was like, "Well, how do you know I'm wise? You know, I might just look that way." And he's like, "No, you look that way because you've had experiences that have made you that way." He's like, "You know, I want you to have these. This is the best way to get a deck of cards, right, is as a gift." And I didn't know any of this at the time. And so I started playing with the cards, doing readings for people that I knew and stuff. And eventually I got pretty good with them and was doing them, you know, in bars or street corners or whatever, and when I needed some money or whatever. And but I hadn't studied anything about astrology. And then I came back to the East Coast, and I got in this relationship for the first time in my life. I got really kind of rooted, and it was like that rooting made a space inside me for something to come in, I guess. And I had this dream, and in the dream I'm lying on my back in a field of green grass, and I'm just like blissing out, you know, and I'm looking up at the sun, and I realize I can look right at it. And I'm looking at the solar disk, and it's all fiery and beautiful and everything, and emblazoned in the disk was the symbol for Venus. And normally, in my limited Aries fashion, I would, I'm going to meet a woman. But I was already living with a woman, so I knew that wasn't it. And I decided, well, this has got to mean something, right? So I got an ephemeris, and I figured out basically my chart, at least the positions of the planets, right? And then I figured out what was going on is that Venus was transiting my sun on that very day when I had that dream. So it was like the Venus was emblazoned in the solar disk. Literally, that's what was going on up there. And I was just like, whoa, you know, I got to find out more about this. So I got some books at used bookstores and just started reading, and next thing you know, and this was at the Uranus-Neptune conjunctions, by the way, I should add that, you know, so there was like this, you know, a lot of energy going, and I found out since then that there's a lot of people who had spiritual quickenings around that time, and who also, you know, found astrology at that time, or had a major, you know, quickening in their astrology career at that time, or whatever. So after that, it was just like, it was in me, and it was something I had to do, you know. It's like that quote where Carl Jung talks about the artist is not a person endowed with free will, that basically, you know, they are the instrument of the art, you know, and that's kind of what astrology is for me. It's like I have to do it. So I, you know, I've been doing it for more than the Jupiter cycle now, and hopefully, you know, I'm doing it better and better as the time goes on.
So since you've become an astrologer, how has astrology impacted your life, both personally and as a career?
Personally, I mean, astrology has been so good for me in so many ways, because, you know, I kind of grew up in a small country town and, you know, kind of sheltered, and
pretend you're talking to the people.
And you know, astrology's been a real growth experience for me, because it's kind of like, you know, always being in a therapy group, in a 12-step group in a lot of ways, you know. because astrology is always forcing you to look within, right? And so, I don't know where I'd be without it, honestly. It's made all the difference in so many ways. And professionally, I know I've grown way beyond what I would have in a limiting university type curriculum, because astrology as a cosmic language and speaks to all other disciplines, right? I mean, you have to know a little bit of history to do mundane astrology. You have to know your sociology. You have to know some psychology and some counseling skills if you're going to consult people. So there's there's so many other things that if you really want to be good at this, you got to know what's going on with all these other disciplines. And everybody that I speak to that's any good with astrology, they either speak another language, or they have a degree in psychology, or they're always doing all these other things that enrich them as a person. So professionally, I'd say that's the biggest thing that you have to gain from being an astrologer, is that it demands you to bring in these other disciplines and to grow as a person and as a professional.
It's like becoming a Renaissance person.
Absolutely, it's absolutely that. That's what you have to be.
It's funny. You and I both got dropped out of the university system in sort of rebellion.
Yeah.
Because we went as far as we could, and we couldn't go any further in that limited.
It wasn't feeding us.
Yeah. So can you say something about that to the person who's in college right now, is a little bit confused, fed up with their life, knows they have a spiritual path, or is just awakening to that, but they don't know what? I mean, how can astrology help them?
Well, first of all, I would say I'm not being an advocate for tune on, turn out, drop out like Timothy Leary or anything. I mean, finish your degree, but make sure it's in something that makes you want to get up and get excited about it, And I just didn't have that at the time, and being a very Uranian person, I just wanted to get out. But the thing that astrology can do is that it can broaden your perspectives within whatever discipline you're in, so that you feel like you're not stuck inside of a shell, because when you're studying a specific curriculum, for Uranian people it can feel very constraining, right? It feels like you're have this thing imposed on you. But if you're doing astrology at the same time, it's like there's always this window into these other disciplines and other ways of thinking, and it's going to free you up, right? If I was doing astrology when I was in the university, I probably would have stayed. I wouldn't have needed to leave, right? So even if you're never going to pursue it professionally, if all you ever do is you learn your chart and you learn how to do your transits, to follow your transits, right? You're going to have a leg up. I mean, that's basically, people always say, well, there's no instruction book that comes with life, or there's no instruction book that comes with having a kid or whatever. Yes, there is. It's your chart. It's right there. Everything you need to know is right there. And if you just pay attention to it, and you pay attention to the transits, that's going to enrich your life on a level that you cannot even possibly imagine until after you've done it for a while. So.
What is your? How would you define astrology to the person in Iowa in a wheat field?
Person in Iowa in a wheat field? That's funny. My grandfather was a farmer in Iowa, so.
12th house Neptune.
So I can imagine. My great grandfather, I should say. I'm actually named after him. So if I was talking to old Emil Preston, my middle name's Preston. He was Emil. I don't know. I'd probably talk to Emil about the natural cycles, of course. And the fact that if you really look at the cycles, the daily cycle, the monthly cycle, and the yearly cycle are all basically divisions of a quarterly cycle based on primal alternations of darkness and lightness, right? It's right there in front of your face. You can absolutely see that. And what astrology is doing is astrology is tracking that, and it's symbolically, relating that to your experiences as a human being and in your life And it's just like, it's basically, as an astrologer, you're doing the same thing that storytellers have been doing around fires since, we were living in caves, You're just telling a story, and you're using the language of astrology to guide you within that story, and it's absolutely rooted in the earth and the sun and the natural cycles that you already know very well as a farmer. So really, we're not doing anything here that you don't already do and don't already know absolutely within the depth of your being.
It was interesting because my grandfather told me that his grandfather, it's like 5 generations back, he goes, it's interesting you become an astrologer, and they're all Southern Baptists in Mississippi.
Yeah.
They go, because your grandfather, I never told you about this, but your grandfather was a natural astrologer. He was able to plant the crops at the right moment according to the moon phase. And he used to watch the moon, and just by the shadow on the moon, he could tell you exactly when it was going to rain again. And he was accurate within hours. And everybody was just like, well, I was like, that's cool that's in my blood. It's in your blood too,
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, that was probably the only exposure that I had to astrology now this is my father on my, I was talking about my maternal grandfather. But my father would plant, the potatoes on the waning moon and stuff like that. So I knew about the moon, But yeah, that's omen-based astrology, right? That's like, and everybody does omen-based intuitive living. It's just intuitive living, right? Because, see, the thing is, our eyes are in the front of our heads. We're predators, okay? That's a fact. And there's really no way to get around that. And even if you don't eat meat, the fact is, hardwired into your brain, like the prime directive of Star Trek, to seek out and explore. It's in there. It's in there because, you see, when we came out of the jungle, right, as Australopithecus, what scientists call the lucky ape, right? When Australopithecus came down out of the jungle and onto the savannah, at a time when the earth was warming and the jungle was going away, it had to walk upright in order to reduce exposure to the sun. And it also had to learn how to use tools in order to exploit new food sources such as roots and nuts and everything, okay? And then, so that's kind of the first step. But then, Homo habilis and Homo erectus, one of the main things that separates them is the controlled use of fire and meat eating and hunting, okay? That's how we became human, Homo. All right, and to be a hunter, you have to follow tracks. You have to be thinking future-oriented thoughts. You have to figure out how you're going to meet up with that game. And so that process is absolutely how we became Homo sapiens. And whether or not you're actually hunting and eating meat is absolutely irrelevant. But the point is, in your brain, there's a need to predict. And that's what we as astrologers do, right? A lot of people say, oh, well, psychological astrology is, the more proper way. I love psychological astrology, and I absolutely feel like it has its role, and I can do it, and I can do it well, but that doesn't make me not want to do predictions. If I'm doing mundane astrology, predictions for a person, if they really want them, I can predict, okay, yeah, you're going to have to make some choices here before too long, right? Because we're human.
Yeah, Rick Tarnas, he says, remember he said astrology is, what did he say? He said it's not concretely predictive, it's archetypally predictive.
Archetypally predictive, so, but the point is that there is that need. That need is absolutely hardwired into your brain, and that's what astrology can feed. Astrology can feed, and, I saw a thing in The Economist where they did, how Schmitty was talking about. He was talking about in Baltimore about there's 2 camps in the statistics community, kind of like there's 2 camps in the astrology community. You have the frequentists and you have the Bayesians, and they're like all divided about how, well, what's really the correct way to do statistics, and we've got to get our stuff together so we can be presentable to the outside world. The same thing that astrologers are doing. And the thing is, the Bayesians base it on kind of a distribution rather than just, counting beans or whatever. And that's a really simplistic way of looking at it. But I saw this article, and it totally validated what I was talking about. and basically giving one piece of information, giving one event. Your average Joe on the street can totally predict the outcome of what that event's going to be because they almost have these Bayesian, basically it made it look like they have these Bayesian probability distributions stored inside their heads from years and millions of years of predicting, of living, and having to predict to live, knowing when the rain's going to come to plant the crops. And that's the successful guy who passes on his genes, right? So, it's totally there within us, and astrology is really an awesome tool to enrich that.
Can you talk about the sort of receding of the ice ages and the agricultural sort of societies that happened 10,000 years ago, and maybe why they developed astrology?
Yeah, well, I mean, we went from these hunters, right, who were hunting big game because, the most efficient way to feed yourself in terms of calories for the investment that you're putting out is to hunt large game. And that's why we evolved hunting large game, because it's absolutely the most efficient way to feed yourself. But as the large game supply started to dwindle, we realized that we had to kind of diversify, and that's when you see what they call kind of the middle Stone Age, and basically, all kinds of things like the bow and arrow, the spear thrower, the fish hook, domestication of the dog. All these new food strategies started to play out because we were diversifying and finding new ways, and then we started to plant crops. We started to sow wild cereal grains that it grew at certain elevations, and we started to bring them down into places that were actually even more fertile. And then just like we need to be future oriented in tracking the game, we learned to track the seasons, right, and the rain, and the Nile Valley, and it would flood, at the heliacal rising of Sirius, right? So they started learning to follow, and this was of course kind of sidereally based, but tropically, the tropical system came along after that, and and basically it just in a real simple form it went like this: we learned to track game, then we learned to track nature and the seasons, then we learned to track, like when we became city dwellers, we learned to track omens for the king, right? And when was a good time to go to war, and when was a good time for political kind of things or whatever. So we tracked those kind of things, and then eventually when the Hellenistic system came about, we started learning actually to track an individual's fate, and that was a huge development. And then nowadays, instead of fate, we're tracking more the individual's spiritual unfoldment, their evolutionary astrology. So we're doing the same thing. We're just tracking at a different level.
So, we got some nice background. Anyway, so just in one or maybe two or three sentences, how would you define astrology to someone that doesn't know what it is, seeing it for the first time? Like they've been into their sun sign, and now they finally go, wow, there's Venus and Moon and Mars. And they're like, wow. And so how would you define astrology?
To someone who is
just discovering it.
Just discovering it. Well,
they said, Gary, what is astrology?
Basically, again, I think it's the manual for living life.
Can you say at the beginning? Say astrology is.
Astrology is a manual for living life. It's first of all, your birth chart is the blueprint of your karmic purpose. All right. Now I do heliocentric astrology, so I believe the heliocentric view is kind of like the spiritual impulse, but the geocentric view is kind of like in heliocentric astrology, the Earth is the circle with the cross in the middle, so that's where spirit, the circle of spirit, comes to incarnate. So the geocentric chart is kind of the map of what that spiritual impulse being here on Earth entails. In other words, it's a map of, it's the manual for how you live your life.
What would you say to the skeptical scientists who one of their arguments is, you astrologers are behind the times. We've proven a long time ago that Earth's not at the center. We need to go to heliocentric. And it's cool that you use heliocentric, but what would you say to the skeptic at large who's...
Well, from a phenomenological point of view, we still, even with all the scientific advances, if you take all the instruments of abstraction away, if you take the scientist's telescope away from him, and he walks out on a starlit evening and looks out at the sky, he remains a very small being, on a planet with bright lights circling overhead. So from a phenomenological view, that is reality, right? The geocentric view is absolutely has to do with our physical presence here on Earth and what that life entails. So
relativity seems to come in there,
Yeah, exactly. From point of view of what it takes to be a human being on the face of this earth, the geocentric view is absolutely still 100% appropriate. And the heliocentric view, I think, absolutely, as astrologers, we need to be looking at that, because that is a place where we absolutely can expand. And some people have looked at it, but not enough. I really think that's a bag. That's something that all astrologers should have in their bag of tricks. And the thing is, I don't necessarily believe that it's any one person's right or place or purpose to tell you, you should be doing heliocentric and you should be doing it in this way. What I'm saying is, I think you should look at it. As an astrologer, I think you really should be looking at it, because the scientists would have a point there. Hey, we've known for 500 years that this thing actually revolves around the sun. And if you think about it, that we are stardust. It's just like that Joni Mitchell song says, right? We know that in the last gasp of a star's life, it crushes down and when all the hydrogen is burned up, it goes to helium, and then it fuses the heavy elements, and then it spews the seeds of life out across the universe, right? That's totally spiritual. So from a spiritual point of view, I think it's absolutely appropriate to look at the heliocentric as kind of that spiritual impulse, right? The Big Bang. But then, to actually live here on Earth, the geocentric view it's never going to be out of style. I mean, here we are with evolutionary astrology, and who knows what other forms of looking at it we can come up with. But I think the heliocentric is absolutely part of where our science needs to expand.
So what would you say to Carl Sagan if he's sitting here saying astrology is bunk?
Well, I would say, are we guilty before proven innocent? Where is the burden of proof? Is the burden of proof? If you're going to say that it's bunk, then you have the burden of proof, right? So many people have set out to disprove astrology and become converts. So that's the beautiful thing about it, is once you actually start looking at it, it grabs a hold of you because it's so profound, So I would say, well, how about proving it, big guy? Maybe we'll have him on our side one of these days.
Oh, he's dead now, but maybe he is on the spiritual realm. What do you think about the scientist who goes to disprove astrology and only looks at sun sign astrology in the newspaper?
Well, that would be like trying to disprove global warming by simply looking at Antarctica, right? That's the big thing now, where they're saying, well, the ice is melting in the Arctic, but it's not melting in the Antarctic. It's like, okay, well, and actually that's half the equation. So that the sun sign's not even 1/10 of the equation, because there's 10 other what we call planets in astrology. And then there's signs and houses. So, that would be like basically trying to disprove Chinese by, using English or something. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense at all.
Totally. What fascinates you most about astrology that you'd like to convey to the world?
What fascinates me the most is that it's inexhaustible, just like the process of life. I mean, it absolutely mirrors the beautiful and infinite variety of life that we see here on the planet. You know, as a human being, when I look out on nature, you know, I see this beautiful, endless diversity, right? And astrology has the same diversity inherent within it as a system. So it's a language of life. Absolutely, it's absolutely a living, breathing thing, just like the planet is.
In astrology, there's various types. You know, Vedic astrology, Hellenistic astrology, evolutionary astrology. What type of astrologer are you, and why?
I'm absolutely an eclectic astrologer. You know, I never ever wanted to reduce myself to being in any one camp. You know, not that that's a bad thing for some people. That's the way they operate, and that's okay. You know, because that's all they need. But for me, you know, I being self-taught, I always wanted a little bit. You know, like a buffet. I always wanted a little bit from all the plates, and I do try to make sure I have a grasp of the fundamentals of each system before I, you know, use it in practice. But, you know, I mean, and that's absolutely appropriate from a professional point of view. I mean, any counselor that you go, if you ask them, you know, well, what's your theoretical perspective? Very few of them are going to say, well, you know, I'm a Jungian, or I'm a Freudian, or I'm a cognitive behavior. You know, they might say that to somebody, to a client, because that's their sort of predominant. But, you know, most of them use a little bit of object relations, a little bit of cognitive behavioral, a little bit of Jungian, you know, and it's absolutely, you know, a valid frame of reference. So.
How do you prepare for a session with a client, and do you ever get nervous beforehand? And what would you say to a new astrologer who's just learning and they're doing charts, starting to do charts, and they got that feeling of like that in their gut, that nervousness before the session? And how do you deal with that?
Honor that feeling, because the consulting astrology, I think, in a similar way as a therapist or a counselor, you are performing an absolute sacred service, and the trust that client is arriving with is profound, and you have an absolute obligation to honor that nervousness, and you know, get yourself some counseling skills, because people are going to come to you with real life issues that you need to be able to, you know, feel confident about handling. And absolutely, even after having a counseling degree and doing astrology and counseling people with some really heavy real world issues out in the community, I still get nervous before I do a reading, you know, occasionally. It kind of depends on the client, you know. Sometimes you're not sure that they're clear about what they want, so it's kind of hard for you to be sure that you can deliver that. But you know, when I prepare, I told somebody the other day, basically, you know, if you look at it from the Jungian perspective, when I prepare for a chart, what I'm really doing is intuiting, right? I'm doing the tracking. You know, I'm saying, well, I'm familiarizing myself with the formations and the technical aspects, but I'm saying, I wonder if this is what, you know, it was for, you know, Mary or Joe, or you know, I wonder if there's a pattern here.
So pattern recognition.
Yeah, pattern recognition. And then, you know, when you sit with the client, you kind of test that. You know, you test that through interviewing them, and so then you're kind of in the experiencing, you're in the sensing and the emoting and the feeling part, and then after that you move into a place where you're like, okay, you know, you're kind of analyzing and going on what they've said. You know, you're giving, you know, feedback and recommendations and so forth.
So you're kind of taking the interview and feeding it through the lens of the chart back at them.
Yeah. It's all reflective, you know, and so it's kind of like, you know, you start out intuiting, and then you're actually, you know, sensing, experiencing the chart with the person, and then you kind of step back from that from an analytic point of view and just kind of problem solve, and kind of logically, look at it from an objective point of view, which is really the ultimately what they're coming to you for, because they're so wrapped up in whatever the issue might be. They need that objectivity, probably most of all. They need you to be there with them first. So,
can you talk about the whole thing, like where you described a transit and you described it on many different levels, and
they still don't get it.
Well, no, they get it. They go away 6 months later. They write your letter saying, "Oh my God, you were so right. You predicted this." But really, you just talked about the different possibilities. But they think you're this magic seer who predicted the exact one because they locked on to like one of the possibilities. And now they've the clients do this ego inflation thing. Can you talk about that?
Well, what clients don't realize in that situation is that it's just like I was talking about with that ability to predict. It's within all of us, and when you are practiced at engaging your intuition, it's really not that magical of a thing, to kind of hone in on something. If someone's using their sun or their Jupiter, it's pretty obvious. If you've been doing astrology for any time at all, you can see sun and you can see Jupiter, right? And so if you see that in the chart and the person's not giving you that vibe, you can pretty much be sure that they're not owning that, right? And if they have a big transit coming up, firing that off, and you're talking to them about what that experience might feel like, and they haven't opened themselves up to that experience yet, when they have that experience, it's going to be liberating. And they're going to be like, wow, they're going to be like a kid with a toy, So it's absolutely appropriate for them to feel that way. But, humility is important at that point, because you don't want them to think that, you like hold the key to the universe and they're dependent on you or anything. But, you absolutely affirm their success, and you kind of feed it back on them. Well, hey, I could have been wrong if you hadn't taken the steps that you did to discover this part of yourself. I could have just as easily been wrong, but you made me right.
Can you talk about the astrologer's role as a counselor in helping people prepare for upcoming transits?
Yeah, you have to be really careful about introducing the problematic part of a transit, I think. Absolutely, you want to prepare for people for something when you see something that's going to be, hard. But I think you owe it to them also to talk about, first of all, the way through the problem, through around or overcoming, and the potential on the other side of when that problem's solved, what that will look like. So, basically, if I see a really hard transit coming up for somebody, what I try to do is I say, hey, look, there's something coming up and it looks like it could be, difficult. What kind of experiences have you had, with respect to this energy before? And they might talk, and they can basically confirm that, that's been kind of a hard thing for them to deal with in the past. And then you kind of get into it with them, and talk about how and why it was hard. And then, you look to the strengths in the chart that are there, and you say, well, look, this is what you have to take you through this situation. And if you come through the other side of this situation, this is the kind of the prize for attacking this and taking it on. So you always try to leave somebody with hopefulness, even about a difficult situation.
So it's kind of like you're a strategic advisor.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely being an Aries, I like to think of it in terms of military strategy sometimes, it's really fascinating when you start studying the astrology of different military figures and stuff, and you start looking at what they were doing, and saying, wow, he was doing Uranus there, or whatever.
Because, a lot of people are depressed, down and out, and it seems like we need more strategies for taking on life.
Absolutely. I mean, most people have absolutely no idea what to do with depression. And depression is a place where most people are going to be sooner or later. It's part of being human. And oftentimes the biggest thing you can do is just to affirm that it's an okay place to be, of course, to start out with. But
and not have to go buy all those drugs they show in the commercials.
Yeah, exactly. There are alternatives to pharmaceutical relief from these symptoms, but I know I've had clients that come to me. I had a lady who came to me with postpartum depression, and as soon as I identified what was going on for her, she realized, okay, this is just really something going on with my body. This too shall pass, basically, is what you're telling them. And that absolutely is inherent with astrology, because even if it's a Pluto transit, maximum, you're talking about 2, maybe 3 years, and you're moving on with your life, So that's the beautiful thing about astrology, is this too shall pass is inherent within whatever situation you're dealing with.
Sometimes when I see a difficult transit, like a Pluto transit coming, and I know they need to hear when it's going to be over, but I also sense there's an opportunity in it to deepen their soul, to deepen their life. Can you talk about the treasures of a difficult transit?
Oh yeah, Pluto. Well, Pluto was called Dis by the Greeks, right? And then he became Pluto, Dis Pater, they call him. And Dis was a god of underground mineral wealth. So there's absolutely riches inherent with going, underground and going within. And, Pluto, I think, oftentimes, when you think about it in terms of 8th house kind of deal, if the 2nd house is our personal values, and then, if the 7th house is the other, then the 8th house is kind of like value systems of the other. So it's kind of like other people's value systems, and many times in life we have other people's value systems imposed upon us, and we're kind of expected to take them on. And so, what happens in that case, of course, is that our own value systems become, kind of put aside, or put literally underground, right? They have to be put away. And oftentimes that's really what Pluto's about. Pluto is about bringing up stuff that you've had to put away, that's yours, and you have every right, to express. So really, it's a journey of self-discovery. I actually have an article in the coming out in the ISAR newsletter, and it's called Positive Disintegration Towards a New Plutonic Humanism in Astrology. And it's all about taking that positive view of Pluto, and this guy Kazimierz Dabrowski, he was a humanist psychologist, and basically what he said is, without the anxiety, or that basically he said anxiety and neurotic kind of feelings, including depression, that's a good thing. That's a good sign. It shows that there's a possibility for growth. Because think about it, if everything was fine and we were just going along fine, we would just stay the same. There's no reason to change without some anxiety. So it's absolutely a growth indicator, and so that's what you're looking for, is what the inherent potential for growth is within that experience.
Like an athlete preparing for the season. The season's coming. Anxiety. Yeah. Oh no, yeah. Competition.
Yeah, exactly. And the athlete's got to train in order to be prepared for that season, and that's basically what you're doing in a Pluto transit is. You're doing that work. You're doing your spiritual push-ups. To train for the season.
And you're probably surprised by the hidden wealth, the buried treasure you uncover.
Oh yeah, I mean, the empowerment. People, I mean, Pluto is often associated with will, right? And it's the kind of will that's really unconquerable. I mean, if you look at it in terms of mythology, right? Pluto was basically an equal with Zeus. He was a brother to Zeus and Poseidon, and they split up the kingdoms. Zeus got the heavens, and Pluto got the underworld, and Poseidon got the seas. But Pluto's kingdom is kind of special in the sense that he kind of rules over it with an iron hand. I mean, nobody else is allowed to go down there. He's got this kind of exclusive type of rule. Jupiter was always Zeus was always having to go and kind of hash out all these things that were going on with, but pretty much in Pluto's world, he's got the final say so. So it's
Zeus kept having to send Mercury down there,
yeah.
Work a deal.
Yeah, Mercury was the only one that could go down there. And isn't it interesting that the two signs, the two glyphs of Pluto and Mercury, are the only ones that contain all three of the crescent of soul, the circle of spirit, and the cross of matter. And they're I find that they are kind of interchangeable in that sense. So Mercury is really important when you're dealing with Pluto issues, obviously, as the messenger. But yeah, I mean, Pluto empowerment is always just it's so affirming, and it's so enlivening. I mean, people just really come alive when they discover their Pluto. When they discover this empowerment, and it's wonderful to see. It's wonderful to see people saying, "Wow, yeah, I can do this. I can be more than I ever thought I could be." It's kind of like that "Be all you can be," the military slogan, but on another level, I suppose.
How do you? You talked about preparing for a session, but how do you technically prepare for a session?
Technically,
what do you look at?
Well, it depends on the question a lot.
Let's say they're just coming from a natal chart reading, first chart they've ever done.
Okay, person's just looking for a natal chart reading. Basically, I'm going to look at, first of all, the big three, the sun, moon, and the ascendant, and I'm going to look at major transits that are going on. But really, I'm looking for that pattern recognition. I'm looking for the kind of synergy that's going on in the chart. I'm that kind of, I just think that way. I kind of I see the forest before I see the trees. So, I'll look and see, well, is it a bucket pattern? Is it a seesaw? And what planets are highlighted in that sense? If you have everything below the horizon and one planet above the horizon, well, that planet's going to be really important for this person. And then, I look at progressions in terms of if there's a really important progressed event that stands out. If a planet has been retrograde in the nativity and it's stationed and gone direct, you really want to pay attention to that. Or if any planets changed signs recently by progression. Also, I look at the seasons. Basically, the relationship between the sun and the moon. That's the phase of the moon that the person was born under, and then how that relates to the progressed lunar phase, right? So they were born under one season, and they're living out another season, and I want to be able to talk to the person about that. So it's not necessarily technical, really. it's kind of like just looking at relationships more than anything.
Synthesized introspection on the whole chart.
Yeah, I want to know where everything's at, of course, you know, but I don't really go, oh, well, this person has Venus in Virgo, so they're really analytical in their relationships, and, you know, I mean, I guess maybe I'm doing that on one level, but really what I'm trying to look for is kind of an overall sense of the thing. And then, you know, when I start talking to the person and meeting their experience, that's when the Venus in Virgo, you know, I'll go, okay, what they just, you know, I'll hear the person say a Venus in Virgo thing, and I'll go, okay, Venus in Virgo is acting that way, you know, and
you just mentioned about chart patterns, and I don't think anybody I've interviewed yet has said anything about it. Could you quickly just say how the psychology of the person is related to having, say, planets below or above or east or west? Could you just say, like, you know, all charts have patterns and go from there?
Yeah, all charts have an inherent within them a pattern, and Mark Emmon Jones was kind of one of the persons that first started looking at that, and I think that's absolutely huge. Michael Earlywine's really big on that, and that is what drives his exploration of the heliocentric chart. He's really into looking at the overall pattern of the heliocentric chart and what that says about the person on a kind of a soul level. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, if you have all the planets below the horizon, you're going to tend to be kind of introverted, right? Because these are all planets that are unseen. These are all stars that are kind of hidden from view. And then, you know, if you have them all above the horizon, you're going to be this person that's like really out there, you know. So that's the difference between an extrovert and an introvert is huge. So, you know, when you're looking at the patterns like that, I think that kind of thing is maybe even more important than any of the details, you know, because, you know, they say the sum is greater than the or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so it's kind of what do you want to call it? What's that school of psychology that looks at the? I'm trying to think of the name of it. Darn it! Now I'm drawing a blank.
It's all right. We can edit anything in.
The Gestalt. You're looking at the Gestalt of the chart. You're looking at kind of the. I did an article in Member Letter on Johnny Cash's chart, and it's a seesaw. And it's so obvious that he was this seesaw kind of person because, you know, the seesaw is really an enigma. Because on the one hand, they look like they're all about this, but then there's this other part, and it's like you never really know which part they're coming from. And you know, everybody that ever had anything profound to say about Johnny Cash, that's what they were talking about, is this guy is an enigma, you know. So really, that's kind of the essence of what Johnny Cash is as a person, rather than talking about, his stellium in Pisces, and it was a Pisces Virgo type of seesaw.
You talked about the upper and lower quadrant, or hemispheres in terms of psychology. Could you describe the east and west?
The east and west. Well, the upper and lower is kind of like, just to really simplify, it's kind of like introvert, extrovert, and then the eastern and western is kind of like self versus other. You know, is the person really self-oriented? Do they really need to understand things in terms of their own experience? Do they need to filter what somebody else is saying through their own experience in order to relate to it, or are they really other-oriented, where they don't necessarily even think about themselves a whole lot, but they're just really tuned in to the other person?
Cool. Tell us about your emerging connection with the astrological community and how you feel about meeting other astrologers and what we offer as a community.
Well, the community is just a lot of fun. I mean, there's so many really cool people that do astrology, you know, and it's really neat to see all their personalities and how diverse we are, really. I mean, it's just amazing. You know, you have people that are trained in everything from acting to psychology, you know, to history and Greek and all these other things, but they're really astrologers, So the diversity is really exciting for me, most of all, and it's just amazing to be immersed in company with people who speak your language. It's so I don't know. It's just really it feels really nurturing on kind of a soul level. It's like that must be what culture really feels like. Like I don't know. A lot of times nowadays I see kind of a lack of culture being the main thing that's problematic for a lot of people. I mean, TV and consumerism is
same restaurants in every corner.
And, everything like that. It's kind of numbing in a way, and to be immersed in community with people that speak a really diverse language is kind of the opposite of that. It's like really, connecting with a culture, and I just think it's really exciting to wonder kind of what's going to happen with that and how that culture is going to evolve, and what it's going to become. There's a lot of potential there.
Can you talk about the sort of emergence and the growth or the evolution of astrology with the online presence, like the MySpace?
Yeah, I've been blown away, really. Even though I'm technically a Generation X, individual, I'm kind of just before that curve when computers really started being, mainstream. Like we had one computer in my high school, so it was like I never really even got online until I was like 30, right? The internet had been around for a while, and so, I'm not really that like these kids that are growing up nowadays that were born under the Uranus-Neptune conjunctions. They're so technically savvy, and it's just amazing to me. But, I was talking to you, I think, when we first met about astrology community and how exciting it could be if we could really build some of that, and the potentials that I saw out there, and you were like, well, in the meantime, there's always the online, until we manifest that. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, he has a point. And I started looking into some of it. There's a big group on MySpace. Chris Brennan's got the horoscopic astrology, and there's a lot of there's an incredible amount of astrology to be learned simply on the internet. It costs you nothing. You don't even have to go to the bookstore. You can just Google, whatever, and that's a really good research tool too, the internet. So. Anymore, if I'm going to reference something, my first thought is to, when I'm writing an article or something, my first thought is to try to make it a web-based reference so that, somebody doesn't have to go out and buy a book to figure out what I'm talking about, you know what I'm saying? So, everything from the cosmic weather forums that you've got up there. I mean, the forums are a really cool way for people to kind of like learn and bounce ideas off of each other, and you never know what's going to happen when you get people kind of talking and back and forth and bouncing ideas off of each other and kind of playing with it, And that's the really cool thing that I think is available in the online is it can be kind of intimidating to sit down with someone who's like maybe like, I don't know, just for instance, Rob Hand, who's like, a sort of a demigod in the astrology community, and you might not say, what just comes off the top of your head if you're sitting there in the room with him. But if you're online, that kind of stuff kind of falls away to a degree, and for better or worse sometimes. But there's an element of creativity and Uranian kind of spontaneity within it that's pretty cool.
Yeah, because you could have a conversation going on between some 13-year-old that's just figuring out there is astrology and some 40-year vet.
Right, who has totally different experience, and the 13-year-old can enlighten the the 40-something-year-old vet and the 40-something-year-old vet can give a little guidance to the 13-year-old. So it's pretty cool.
Do you have any favorite person's chart you like, and why?
Favorite charts? I don't know that I have any favorite charts. I have favorite people, of course. Native Americans. I'm really into the Native American viewpoint. And it's really hard to get any accurate charts on those guys because they didn't even necessarily, keep track of birth dates and stuff. But favorite astrologer is Dane Rudger, and I suppose I could say his chart is a favorite of mine too, because he's got a lot of the same. He's got Aquarius and Aries going on like I do.
I like him too. He's got Aquarius and Sag. Like we're both Rudgerians.
So and Grant Louis, that guy was pretty incredible. One of the first books I ever got was Astrology for the Millions and Heaven Knows What. And I still pick those up to this day, and I'm like, holy smokes, man, where was this guy getting this stuff,
Can you talk about any books that you have written, or articles you've written, or books you're working on, and what inspires you to write?
Yeah, what inspires me to write is, by whole signs, I have all my Aries stuff in the third. So, that was really enlightening for me, because for a long time, by what do you call it? Is it dynamical or topical house division?
Topical.
Topical. By topical house division, I've got all this stuff in the second, right? So I should be, have all this second house stuff going on. I just never resonated with that. And I always thought, well, it's because, Pisces is on the cusp and this and that. Well, I think that has something to do with it. Pisces is very
spiritual values.
Yeah, non-material sometimes, but really, when I looked at all that Aries stuff in the third house, I'm like, okay. So, third house stuff, hitchhiking around the country, writing, reading, all that stuff just really comes natural to me. But what inspires me to write really is wanting to understand. And they say you teach best what you most need to learn. So it really, writing an article for me is a learning experience. I have this curious thing that kind of, who is it that said, the basis of scientific breakthroughs is not aha, but that's interesting. So it's not the aha moment that really counts. It's the that's interesting. So when I find something that's really interesting that doesn't necessarily fit with what I've been taught, that's what really excites me, because it's like, okay, here's something that I need to figure out. And so, I use the writing as a vehicle to figure it out. And hopefully, that'll be a window for someone else to kind of, by walking in my shoes through that process, they can it'll maybe open windows, for them too. I'm still working on getting I've had several book-length manuscripts that I've completed and scrapped or reworked or whatever, but I have an article that I'm writing right now for the Mountain Astrologer that's about the hero archetype. And there's this lady named Carol Pearson, and she wrote these books about the hero and how there's different types of heroes, right? The warrior hero is kind of the one that we, in Western civilization we recognize, but there's also, she basically talks about 4 different types of hero. You have the warrior hero, and then you have the wanderer, who kind of goes on more of a quest, and then you have also the martyr, and also the magician. And what she's talking about, what I realized is she's talking about fire, air, water, and earth, right? So those are 4 heroic archetypes, and it totally goes into the Hellenistic elements. What I struggled with as a writer for a long time, when you read about other writers, not necessarily astrology writers, but just other writers like Ray Bradbury, for instance. If you read his
Or Joseph Campbell.
Or if you read about writers talking about writing, they talk about paying attention to your audience, and as when I'm writing for the Mountain Astrologer or something, that audience is defined for me, right? Because you already know that these are people that have somewhat of a sophisticated understanding of astrology, right? You don't have to look at things from a beginner standpoint, but if you want to write a popular astrology book, you got to write something that even an absolute beginner can sink their teeth into, right? And that's really hard. That's really hard to be able to make it interesting for the most, evolved astrologer and something that a beginner can sink their teeth into. So I wrestled with that for a long time. And when I stumbled upon this idea of the hero archetype and relating that to astrology, I was like, aha, And incidentally, that's kind of the acronym for the book, Actualizing the Hero Archetype. Aha. Yeah. So yeah, I really want to work with that, and not just on an elemental level, but it's very much in tune with the whole humanistic movement, which I think that people learn in a non-directional environment as much as they do when you're counseling people, and a non-directive approach is really good. So I want to make it. I kind of want to make it an experience for people to look at how they can, different ways that they can define what a hero is, and how they can awaken that process. And really a hero is just being a person who's discovering who they are, right? And that process, that being a seeker is being a hero. So if you can awaken that desire to seek, and to explore and to find new worlds, that prime directive of Star Trek that's hardwired into our brain. If you can awaken that seed in people, then you're going to get them excited to begin with, and then if you can tie that to astrology, well, then there you go, right? So I'm looking at it in terms of, like I talked about, looking at the seasons in the chart and the seasonal relationship between planets. And what I'm thinking about is that, in terms of the masculine archetypes, if you look at the Mars as kind of the instinctive part of the male archetype, and the Sun as kind of the logical part of the male archetype, then when you combine those two, then you really have the complete Renaissance man, right? He's able to, he has his Mars, but he has the Sun's kind of, holding him, and using him appropriately. So if you look at the angular relationship between those two, and how that speaks to what heroic archetype the person might resonate to, I think that might be a whole new way of looking at astrology.
Totally. I mean, I'm on the same wavelength. I mean, like the sun symbolizes like that hero archetype, but why is it exalted in Aries, the sign of courage through action? And
exactly.
And a lot of times in readings, and I think this is where astrology is going. This is why I'm so interested in your work as well. Is that a lot of times for life purpose, I'll combine the image of the sun with the North Node and the midheaven and the planet that rules midheaven to give a sense of overall life, destiny, purpose.
Right.
And what you're saying here is exactly what I'm fascinated with. Is we're pioneers taking it to the next level.
Yeah. Anytime you're just looking at one factor, it's so limiting. But even if you just look at two factors and the relationship that they're making, then you've brought it to a level that's so much more rich and complex.
And descriptive of that individual.
And and absolutely, it's more alive. So that's basically where I'm going with this book, and I'm just kind of taking my time with it right now. I don't know if I'm going to self-publish or if I'm going to submit it to kind of the mainstream publishers or any of that stuff. But I don't want to get bogged down in all that. I just kind of want to keep it, fun for now, and play with it, and look at it in people's charts, and I'm doing some research, with the Astro Data Bank, and seeing, okay, when the Sun and Mars are related this way, what kind of people show up. And
can you talk real quick about what the Astro Data Bank is to a person that doesn't know?
Astro Data Bank is a really exciting project that has, I can't remember exactly how many, but several tens of thousands of records of individuals' birth records, and they're sorted according to how accurate those records are. What's really cool about the thing that I was just saying is that even without an accurate birth time, you can be pretty confident of where the Sun and Mars were, so then you can talk about their relationship. With an accurate birth time, you can do a lot more in terms of houses and everything. But what I would really like to see is more projects like that, like Astro Data Bank, because it's so valuable to be able to have an idea and then see, okay, is this grounded in reality, right? I mean, what do the actual records say? And isn't that what science is, right? So
can you talk about how you can do a search in there, or an aspect?
There's so many tools that are available with that. You can go in and you can say, okay, let me see all the people that are born with Sun conjunct Saturn, like myself, right? And then you can go, bloop, you get a list there, and you can look at, okay, what sign was it in, what house was it in, and all that stuff. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. For people who are really mathematically and research oriented, there's all kinds of tools that you can actually, basically figure out how, what's the word, how often this alignment occurs by chance, and how often it occurs in your sample, and determine whether it's statistically significant.
Like you could take, say, a Mercury trine Neptune and find out, like, okay, I'm going to do a search of writers that had that.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting is what you find when you do that is that no one particular two-factor combination like that is really going to tell you much.
And that's when scientists will come in and say, "Ha, see, astrology doesn't work."
No, but what it's telling you is that the language that you're speaking is richer than that, right? So you have to kind of expand your the way you're thinking about it a little bit.
Your lens.
Yeah, your lens, exactly.
Spiritual path. Astrology seems to indicate that there is some kind of transcendent being or infinite intelligence sticking archetypes into bodies. Most would call God, Allah, the eternal source, the creator. Do you have a spiritual path, or how has astrology enriched your spiritual path or your approach to any kind of faith?
Yeah, when I started out on this journey where I found astrology, of course I had no idea that that's where I was going. The dream that I had was given to me, and I don't know where else that dream could have come from. You can call it the collective unconscious, you can call it my higher self, whatever you want to call it. There was some creative intelligence at work there, for me to have a dream that was based on, actual alignments that were happening. So, it's a given for me, what you want to call that. What the spiritual path that I was following at that time was based on, the Native American wisdom, the Taoist wisdom and stuff. It was very much an earth-based, and really, tropical astrology is very much earth-based. So, I think that absolutely, Einstein said, you either act as if everything is a miracle, or you act as if nothing is a miracle. And to put it in really short terms, if you're doing astrology, you've chosen the miracle path, right? That's what I said in my article about Einstein in the Mountain Astrologer, and that's it. Whatever name you want to put on it, you've chosen the miracle path. And so So, that sense of wonder that Einstein talked about, which was the seed for all scientific discovery, that it's inherent in what you do, and you'll find that it's inherent in who you are, too.
Yeah, if you read a lot of Einstein's writings, you find these constant references to this mysterious cosmic religious feeling.
Yeah.
What do you think he was getting at with it?
I think it was just a sense of awe and wonder, and I mean, even, I remember, I'm not a Christian anymore, but I remember, singing the songs and, "O Lord thy God, when I an awesome wonder," and isn't that the same thing that all religions are talking about, right? They're talking about this awesome wonder at creation, and basically the cosmologists, even the scientists, are saying now that it's pretty hard to say that there's not a creative intelligence at work in the universe. It appears that the universe has been fine-tuned for carbon-based life forms such as us to exist. And the odds of that happening by chance, you could fill a whole library with the zeros that would follow a 1 that would express, I can't remember who it was, but he said it's like throwing a dart across the universe and hitting the bullseye. I mean, the odds of it happening the way it has are infinitesimal. And so there's absolutely a creative intelligence at work there, and I think it doesn't really matter what you call it, as much as you're just, that you are in touch with it, and you're a servant of it, basically.
What would you say to the Bible Belt Christian Southern Baptist who's like, astrology is the work of the devil?
Work of the devil.
What do you really say to these people that just...
Well, I guess it would probably depend on how much of a smart aleck mood I was in.
Well, let's say you're having a serious discussion, and you've actually helped them by giving them an astrological piece of insight, and they're like, "Wow, but
how can this be?" Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that really the reason why in the Middle Ages or whatever people would have been, that the religious people would have been talking about astrology in terms of being a tool of Satanists or whatever, is that it's a powerful tool for self-understanding, right? And if you want to be the person in power, you don't want other people having that self-understanding. You don't want people to be thinking about, the nature of reality and empowering themselves. You want them to be accepting your version of that. So, basically it's, it's just a matter of, do you believe that the motivation of the person is to do you harm, or to control you in some way? Or do you believe that the person that you're talking to is just another person like you, and I don't know. I think that if I sit down and talk to anybody and have a meal with them, I think it's going to be pretty evident that I'm not like trying to steal their soul or anything. So I think in a way, and just kind of, the kind of just pointing out the ridiculousness of that notion, that if I wanted to control them, the best way I could do it is to become a politician, or the last way I would ever do it is to become an astrologer. Right? I mean, now I'm this outcast with this label put on me, and I have probably the least chance of controlling them of anyone on the planet effectively, right? I have a really good chance of helping them possibly to understand a few things through a very rich, language. But as far as controlling them, I've taken probably the path of
least effectiveness.
Yeah, of least effectiveness, of utter ridiculousness.
I think we need more jokes about the astrologer sat down with the scientist and the religious fanatic, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
See if we come out with that.
They sit down in a bar and da-da-da.
Scientist says, you're crazy because you don't have any rational basis for this stuff. And the religious people are like, you're crazy because you have no intuitive, mystical basis for this stuff. So we're kind of caught between the science and the religion.
Absolutely. We are caught between science and religion. And, the only thing you can do about that really is just to affirm both places. And, Tarnas talks about that tension of the opposites and how fruitful and productive that can be, I just basically let who I am speak to people, and the fact that I don't disaffirm whatever path they've chosen,
well, it seems like what
speaks volumes to, you live by example.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to convert them to astrology, right? I mean,
and they're definitely trying to convert us, though.
Yeah, but the fact is that what does that say, right? I mean, the fact that you need to convert people, that speaks volumes for me.
Well, it's interesting because it's like astrology is both a science and a religion in a sense. It has a spiritual, mystical component, a language, and it has a scientific, planets moving around in regular cycles that we can measure and calculate and predict. So really, it's like the schism of the Western world is that science and religion have to be divided, and yet astrology is this upstart science that says science, art, language, religion, whatever you want to call it, that says it can be both.
Yeah, that's right. That and what you're talking about is you can see it in the tarot deck, for instance. Temperance, the mixing of opposite things, and the alchemist, going after the philosopher's stone. The mixing of these two, polarities, and if you just crash them together, you're gonna have this big explosion. But if you mix a little bit of this and you carefully blend the two, then you can get this something new that arrives, and is the fountain of youth or an analogous counterpart.
I think astrology is having a renaissance now with the internet, and I think that it probably will be the official language of the Aquarian age once it gets here.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the prophecy of the Aquarian age, and the fact that Jesus spoke about a man with a pitcher in a large upstairs room, that's pretty powerful. And you look at the arrival of the planet Uranus and the American Revolution happening at about that point in time, and Enlightenment philosophy that of equality, and that people are born with inalienable rights. To me, that's like, okay, well, how much more obvious can it get?
Electricity being discovered.
Yeah, so, there's never going to be an official start date to the Aquarian age. I think when we're about probably smack dab in the middle of it, it'll be, claimed as officially here. But, we are moving to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions being in air signs. The one in 2020 is going to be in Aquarius, right? So.
And then in 2080, it's in Aquarius with Uranus there.
Ooh, wow.
Just like it was when Jesus was born, when Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct in Pisces with Uranus there.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I hadn't looked at that.
I wrote about it in my book.
I hadn't looked at that one. Yeah, so that whole mutation of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions into the air element, I think is going to be really, like you said, with the internet, and just air is all about, is very much about community. So, and that's really, I mean, what we need to figure out as human beings is how do we make use of technology in a way that we can actually productively live together on this planet. So
I talked to Tim Terriger about Mountain Astrologer, and he's going to let me film all the covers of the hundreds of mountain astrologers I have.
Oh yeah.
So can you talk about the effect that magazine has had on the astrology community in terms of educational, whatever?
Yeah, the Mountain Astrologer, that is such a cornerstone of the astrological community. It's a portal that people have into our community, and I have a lot of respect for that publication. I remember back before I even knew much about astrology, somebody showed me one, and I was like, oh, that just looking at it sort of seemed kind of magical and kind of important somehow, and then after I started learning a little bit about it, I remember somebody had an article in there about the 27 Club, and it was like when Kurt Cobain had passed and everything, and I thought, well, holy smokes, if this astrology can be used for looking at stuff like that, then I'm in,
Yeah, I grew up in Boulder, and I remember Tim started the magazine as a pamphlet on the streets
right.
of Boulder.
Yeah, that's a very good story.
I was 14, and Uranus was crossing my ascendant, and I just met my wise elder woman, who's 62, teacher that took me as her apprentice. So there's a lot of stuff happening in Boulder around that time.
Oh yeah. Boulder's a really important place for astrology somehow. I think maybe there's like some kind of ley line or something that goes through there or something.
Yeah, my Jupiter, Neptune, Mars line in the 12th goes right through Boulder. It comes right to my ascendant there. So it's perfect for being the spiritual athlete and the astrologer and all that stuff.
Yeah, I love that.
Wow. Is there anything I should ask you that I don't know to ask you?
Let's see. Is there anything to ask me that you don't know?
It's kind of a strange question. I don't know everything about you or your passions.
Yeah. Well,
where do you see the future of astrology going?
Yeah, the future of astrology.
Does it look bright? Does it look?
I think the future of astrology really is kind of just begun, because Hellenistic astrology was kind of the birth of what we call modern astrology. Of course, there was a lot going on even before then. The oldest star chart is like 32,000 years old, right? They found this piece of mammoth tusk, and on it was carved the figure of Orion. And on the back was carved these notches, and the notches show about how many days that constellation is visible during the year, right? And actually what they think is it was a primitive form of pregnancy calendar, because if you take those many days away from a year, that's about the length of a human gestational cycle. So already they were thinking as above, so below, right? 32,000 years ago. These guys running around that we call cavemen, who were actually just as capable of abstract thought as you or I for quite a long time. So, if you think about it in terms of that, from where we are, from 32,000 years, it's kind of like that picture that you see where if you look at the lifespan of man and you condense it into like 1 minute, there's like not a whole lot going on, and then right in the last 10 seconds there's like this, I think that's where we're at that point, and it's really, it's hard to tell, where exactly it's going to go, but I think that potentially it could be the kind of thing where, it becomes common knowledge again, it becomes, because there's people out there on the internet who have absolutely no interest in being an astrologer, but they totally live and breathe and think about astrology, right? So it's already happening. And once it becomes, an actual cultural entity where it's embedded in the culture, I mean,
beyond just sun signs.
Yeah, beyond just sun signs. I mean, people actually start living by a science that makes some sense. Then, I just think that's absolutely hopeful. And, there's no way in the world anybody could imagine what that might look like, but it's going to be wonderful. I know it's enriched my life a lot.
I always tell people my job as an astrologer is to fire myself.
Right.
To do a damn good reading so much that they're so fascinated they have to go investigate and find out for themselves how to track their cycles.
That's right, and so and if you do that good of a job to it, and they become an astrologer, then it's like, it's kind of the ultimate pyramid scheme in a way.
Benjamin came to me for 4 years, and finally he just threw in the towel and said, "I gotta learn this stuff."
Yeah, right. So we're converting people without trying to, in a way, and it's like that 100th monkey thing. I think we're at that point where it's like, there's the 100th monkey thing. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. We're like at 92 or something.
Yeah, we're at that point where it's just going to be like, it's just going to kind of, it's an organic process. It's an organic process, and it's going to take on a life of its own. And, people trying to control it or say what it should be or shouldn't be, or, and it's going to look different. There's going to be lots of different forms of it. And that's a good thing. There's a lot of different kinds of animals inhabiting this planet, and they're all beautiful in their own way. And so, it would be really interesting if it is, in fact, my destiny to reincarnate around 2080, when that whole.
If I'm a vegan, I want to hang around till I'm 109.
Yeah.
All right. Well, any last thing you want to say to anybody? Any last inspirational statements that might be like at the end of the movie?
Well, I just want to say, being a guy who was born under the Uranus-Pluto conjunctions, and then finding astrology under the Uranus-Neptune conjunctions, I'm really excited for the generation that was born under those Uranus-Neptune conjunctions. I mean, I know that, my generation kind of has, a natural proclivity to astrology and things like that, Uranian type things. And I think that the Uranus-Neptune generation absolutely does too. And I'm really excited to see, what they have, because they're actually a lot more compatible with us than we were with the generation that went before us. So, I'm really excited about the young astrologers that are coming up right now, and even more excited about the ones that are going to have that Uranus-Neptune conjunction in their chart, because I think these guys are just going to be like, channeling some pretty powerful stuff.
Saturn's up in there, they're little time lords,
Yeah, exactly. So, show us what you're made of, guys. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, can you say something real quick about what do you think about this whole cardinal climax and the whole reemergence of the 60s culture thing?
Oh, yeah. I talked about, being born under the Uranus-Pluto conjunctions, and, the day I was born was 6 days after Martin Luther King was assassinated. And the whole country was in, the riots going on. People were under tremendous grief, and it's written all over my chart,
You're a rioter?
Yeah. But, being born under that formation and then coming of age under the Uranus-Neptune conjunctions in Capricorn, I mean, there's a profound energy that's alive on this planet right now. And we're coming back around to another important juncture in our lives, the next most important juncture. And it has to do with both the Saturn-Uranus oppositions, which happened during the 60s, and the Uranus-Pluto opening square, which the conjunction happened during the 60s when we were born. And either one of those two would be like a huge crossroads, right? And the two together, that's some really profound stuff. I mean, the last time the Saturn-Uranus oppositions happened, we had the whole counterculture thing. The time before that, we had, World War I kind of rewrote the whole script for the world order. And so Saturn-Uranus alone, pretty much every time that transit comes around, we know that the world order is going to be changing. You know,
which is good right now, huh?
Yes. And, you know, it's like Bob Dylan prophesied, and the times they are changing. Times Saturn, Uranus change. And he said that back in '63, right? And that's where we're at now. That is definitely coming down the pipe again. And then when you throw in the Uranus-Pluto squares on top of that, it's like there's this huge, huge... I think of it in terms of time actually speeds up around these outer planet events. Like when there's not an outer planet event, like there's only a certain amount of stuff that can happen, right? And then when these outer planets events come in, it's like time gets compressed or something, and there's like more stuff that can happen. More stuff is bound to happen. And so, you know, and then you throw in the fact that Jupiter's there too, right? That's what I'm talking about at UAC, is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction at the vernal point. And it's just like, you know, there's some serious energy coming down the pipe, and some of it's going to be, you know, more than individual human beings really are used to handling. And it's going to be stressful in a way, but you know, it's going to be exciting too, you know, to be living through that change and be an agent of change.